Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Autism Understanding Scotland's webinar on emotional regulation. As always, we do like to introduce ourselves at the beginning. So my name is Marion McLaughlin. I am the CEO at Autism Understanding Scotland. I'm a qualified primary school teacher, so I spent just about a decade working in classrooms, everything from nursery to primary, all the stages in between. I'm also one of the spokespersons for the Scottish Government's Give Different Minds campaign, which if you haven't checked it out, you should go and have a wee look at that. I'm the parent of an autistic child, and I'm also late diagnosed autistic myself. I got my own, I've been identifying as autistic for just over 5 years and got my official stamp official identification about 4.5 years ago. Who are you, Flick?
Who am I? So I am Felicity or Flick. I will answer to either. And I am the senior autism practitioner here at AU Scot. I'm a parent to 2 autistic kids and also late diagnosed autistic myself. I got my diagnosis just last year, although I had known for a good kind of 6 or so years before that I was autistic. I'm a former English tutor and I'm one of the co-chairs on the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy Planning Group. It's a bit of a mouthful as well.
Super fun to say at parties though, right?
Oh yeah.
So we always like to share out what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to have a little bit of a chat about why emotional regulation could be more difficult for autistic people. It can be difficult for lots of different people for lots of different reasons, but why it might be more difficult for some autistic folks. Then we're going to have a look at some techniques to help people to regulate their emotions and understand them a little bit better. And then whenever we're finished, we'll have that opportunity to ask questions as well. Right, Flick, what's this all about?
Hello. So we wanted to sort of start off by having a little think about what emotional regulation actually means, and we've got this picture here which might be a bit confusing, but that's to represent the fact that being emotionally regulated is kind of being in like a Goldilocks zone. So if you are emotionally dysregulated, it means that you're sort of outside of that regulated zone, and it might be that you're kind of up above it, it might be that you're in underneath, and we'll have a little look at that on the next slide, sort of more specifically what that means. But yeah, it's sort of, there's a golden zone where you feel just nicely regulated, and you're neither feeling too kind of heightened in your emotions or too sort of sluggish and sort of under responsive with your emotions. So that's just what we mean when we're talking about being emotionally regulated, and as opposed to emotionally dysregulated, because some of you might not have really come across those terms particularly before.
I love that Goldilocks zone, and it's something that, if I'm running a bath or something like that, we might say, is this a Goldilocks bath? Is it just right? So it's not too hot, not too cold. It's the just right one. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So what really is that emotional regulation? So it can be too much or too little of any emotion. And we tend to think about people who are emotionally dysregulated as, maybe being in a meltdown, maybe really struggling to cope with negative emotions, but it's not always negative emotions that people can struggle with that can make them feel dysregulated. Sometimes having too many good emotions can lead to emotional dysregulation as well. So, for example, some autistic people might really struggle with big celebrations because there's an awful lot of really positive emotions as well. That can be one of the reasons why some autistic people can struggle with praise, because that brings up lots of different kind of positive emotions too. So too much of anything can be quite difficult and can lead to dysregulation sometimes. It can be triggered by external factors. So it could be because you're at a party where there's lots of different people who are feeling really excited. It could be because of something negative that's happened that's external to you. But it can also have some internal factors. So it can be related to what's going on with you yourself, how you're feeling emotionally, how you're feeling physically, your sensory processing. So there can be lots of different reasons why somebody might become dysregulated. When you are dysregulated, it could lead to you putting yourself into danger a little bit more easily as well. So it can be quite a difficult thing. You know, it's not always a safe thing to be emotionally dysregulated. And again, that could be emotionally dysregulated because you're high and you're feeling really, really good, or it could be emotionally dysregulated because you're low and you're struggling with that. But if you're not in a regulated state, it is a lot harder for you to be able to look after yourself. Is that kind of fair to say, Flick? Is there anything
Yeah.
else to say there? Yeah.
No, I think that's all good.
Mhm.
Okay. So we've got, sorry, were you gonna?
No, I was going to say, are you happy to talk us through this?
Oh, always.
Mhm.
So yeah, when we're sort of thinking about emotional regulation and where that might lead, if you are really emotionally dysregulated, then what can happen is you can hit like an autistic crisis point. So that might be a meltdown, it might be a shutdown, it might be elopement. So meltdown is one of the ones that people kind of, know about the most, and that gets talked about the most when we're sort of discussing autism. And one of the problems that we find when we're sort of talking about autistic meltdowns is that sometimes people think that they're essentially the same thing as tantrums, which they're really not. And it's quite important to know what the differences are between meltdowns and tantrums, because they are two very, very different things. So one of the big main difference here is that a meltdown is really not controlled. So you've maybe got to that point where you're just so emotionally dysregulated that you hit this kind of neurological event that takes place in the brain, and it's really not something that we have control over. It's not something that we're doing intentionally at all. Whereas a tantrum is much more controlled. It serves a purpose. It's very much, right, well, if I do X, then I get Y. So it is a lot more controlled than a meltdown. So a meltdown, won't typically stop when you give into a demand. What causes that meltdown probably wasn't the very last thing that happened just before it, but say you've got a child and they want another biscuit, and you say no, you can't have another biscuit, and they have that meltdown. Well, if you then say to them partway into the meltdown, okay, it's fine, just take the biscuit, the meltdown's not going to stop, because actually it was never about the biscuit in the first place, and we can't just switch off the meltdown partway through. Whereas if they're having a tantrum and you go, oh, well, okay, have another biscuit, then chances are that tantrum's going to stop pretty quickly, because the whole point in the tantrum was, I want another biscuit. So yeah, you give into that, that demand, then all good, it's fine, the tantrum stops. When you're having a meltdown, because it is that kind of uncontrolled event in the brain, and because you are often, you are emotionally dysregulated, if you're in a meltdown, whether or not it was emotional dysregulation that caused it, once you are in a meltdown, you are definitely emotionally dysregulated. That is a big part. And so partly because of that, we're not necessarily going to be aware of the dangers around us, much like Marion was saying, that one of the sort of risks of being emotionally dysregulated is that perhaps we will kind of put ourselves into danger, not meaning to. And in a meltdown, you're not necessarily going to realize, you might find that people sort of throw themselves down and they're not really very aware of where objects are that might injure them. Whereas in a tantrum, chances are, there's been a bit of a kind of survey of the surrounding area, and people have made sure that, yeah, if they're throwing themselves down, that they're going to stay safe, and it's all good. So yeah, we tend to find that with a tantrum, there's going to be a lot more looking around in general. So that's also going to include kind of looking for attention, because the whole point of the tantrum is, well, I'm going to make this so unpleasant for the people around me that they give in to what I want. Whereas a meltdown, you might find that people, we might kind of, co-regulation can be quite a powerful tool for autistic people if they are dysregulated. So you might find that the person having a meltdown is kind of looking for a bit of co-regulation, they're sort of looking for support from people around them, but they're not kind of watching for reactions in that same way. When if someone's having a tantrum and you walk away into another room, chances are they're going to follow you. They're going to pick themselves up and follow you, because it's very much for the effect. Whereas with a meltdown, you might even find that an individual takes themselves off away in order to have the meltdown. It's not about the display for other people's benefit, in the way that a tantrum is. And there's also a lot of, like I said, that very last thing that happened before the meltdown is not necessarily the thing that really caused it. There can be quite a big build up, especially if you are emotionally dysregulated, and that's sort of gone on over the course of, you know, maybe a day, it might be several days, it might be an hour, it really depends, but there's been that sort of build up. Whereas, yeah, with a tantrum, it tends to be a lot more. I mean, you know, they might be exacerbated by being tired and things like that, but generally it's I want a thing, so I'm going to have a tantrum now. And it is much more about that thing that immediately preceded the tantrum. So yeah, we just like to highlight those differences between the two, because we don't like people to think that they're the same thing, because they're really not. Is that all fair enough, Marion?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about some of the meltdowns that I've had, it's been, you know, any one of the things that preceded it could have been fine on its own, but then that mix of all of them together, so it's one little bit of emotional dysregulation on top of another little bit, on top of another little bit, on top of another little bit, and then that last thing that happens just before the meltdown on another day would be absolutely fine, but then it just, yeah. And again, it's also so linked to, you know, tiredness and self-care. Yeah, loads of different things.
Absolutely.
And it's so linked to anxiety whenever we're thinking about emotional regulation. And there are lots of different kinds of anxiety that there are out there, and we tend to think of them. I mean, that in three kind of separate kind of boxes. So, you know, and sometimes anxiety can be a good thing. I mean, you and I were talking about it earlier, like a little bit of anxiety that encourages you to go and study for that exam, for example, isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, that anxiety that encourages you to put your seatbelt on whenever you go in the car, that's not a bad thing. Some of those anxieties are really handy. Some of them are really, really good. But then there's lots of different other kinds that we have out there. So there's the unlikely to happen anxiety. So the things that you're not necessarily going to experience. So you're not likely to be driving along in a car and your car crashes. That doesn't happen every day. That's an unusual occurrence. It's not likely that you know, you're going to get abducted by aliens, for example. You know, those are not likely things to be happening. But a lot of us might have, you know, those everyday kind of anxieties about the things that are unlikely to happen. And that's a really common thing that the vast majority of people, autistic or not, will experience. A lot of autistic people are more likely to experience anxiety around things that definitely will happen. So I will likely have to make small talk at the school drop-off. And this is where I always get acutely anxious about whether or not any of the parents from my kids' school might be here. In which case, I actually do really like everyone, I promise. But sometimes when I'm tired and I've just been driving, and if somebody cut me off and, you know, my anxiety might be a little bit higher, then sometimes it can be a bit harder to make that social chit chat, especially if I'm already feeling a little bit dysregulated. Things that definitely will happen are things that autistic people do tend to worry about. So quite a lot of times, whenever you share your anxiety with somebody else, if it's about things that aren't likely to happen, then it's very easy for them to say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. That's fine. And that can be reassuring. But whenever you know that the thing that you are worried about is definitely going to happen, that's a lot harder. So that's a huge big thing. And anxiety disorders as well. And there's lots of different kinds of anxiety disorders, including, you know, CPTSD, you know, and social anxiety disorders and things as well. So autistic people can experience all of these. And it is, unfortunately, it's a really sadly common thing for autistic people to be experiencing anxiety disorders, isn't it, Flick? I'm putting you on the spot there.
yes, I wasn't just poised to unmute then. We are unfortunately more prone to anxiety disorders in general. So yeah, it is a tricky one for us a lot of the time.
And I think it's important to say that a lot of that is because of the way that we've been treated by society for a long time. Not necessarily that autistic people are just naturally more prone to it, but the way that we are treated, the stigma, the discrimination that we face, having to operate in a world that is actively hostile to us an awful lot of the time, can really contribute to CPTSD, which, as we know, is an anxiety disorder as well. So all of these things can really be quite large parts of our experiences, can't it?
Yeah. I think that's very common across a lot of autistic experience.
Yeah. And the higher your anxiety, the more likely you are. Do you want to talk through this?
Yep.
Lovely picture.
So what we've got here, you might be wondering why we have random glasses of water on the screen, but this is kind of representing our sort of capacity for anxiety, if you like, and our anxiety levels. So we've got those 3 glasses there, and for your average kind of person who isn't autistic, doesn't have a diagnosable anxiety condition or anything, you might find that when they wake up in the morning, their kind of their baseline level of anxiety that they start the day with is like that kind of empty glass there that's on the left hand side of the screen. No anxiety, or it might be that they have a little, but it's just a little dribble in the bottom of the glass, if you like. Whereas you quite often find for autistic people that when we wake up in the morning, we already have a good bit of anxiety filling our glass. So it might be that we're kind of more the middle one. And that's maybe if we're doing reasonably well at the moment, we're fairly well regulated in terms of our kind of emotional needs and everything. We're still starting off with that slightly higher level when we wake up in the morning. If we're particularly struggling, though, if we are particularly emotionally dysregulated, then if I could just ask everyone to try and stay muted whilst we're presenting, because then you won't end up being recorded or anything. If we're going through a time when we're particularly emotionally dysregulated, it might be that when we wake up in the morning, we're more likely, more like that right hand glass, almost completely full. And the thing is, once we get to the top of the glass and we get to the overflowing point, that's when you're kind of likely to hit one of those autistic crisis points. That's when we're going to be maybe hitting meltdown because we're so emotionally dysregulated by that time. It can help as a kind of analogy for anxiety levels and for seeing the difference between, a non-autistic person and an autistic person, and how we might experience anxiety and how we're kind of starting that day, and why we might then hit that dysregulated point much sooner than other people. Well, if we're already pretty anxious when we're waking up, if we're already starting the day slightly emotionally dysregulated, then it just doesn't take as much other stuff going on, whether that's sensory input that's kind of gone wrong, whether it's a social interaction that goes wrong, or whatever it might be. It doesn't take very much then for our glass to completely fill up and just overflow. That might resonate for some people. Certainly resonates for me. What about you, Marion?
Oh dear, yes, definitely. I think so. And I think especially if you've had that kind of night's sleep where you've been having like a stress dream about something, and then all of a sudden, you wake up panicking in the middle of the night, then you realize if I fall asleep again at this time, I'll get X amount of sleep. And then if I fall asleep at that time, I'll get X amount of sleep. Yeah, you can end up starting the day like almost hangover, can't you?
Yeah.
So knowing how to then re-regulate yourself afterwards can be so handy, can't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
And sometimes it can be such small things, but we'll have a look at those too. So why do we often have the higher baseline anxiety? I think there's a load of different reasons which we can have a look through. Past trauma and CPTSD is a huge big one. The vast majority of people that we support at our organisation do have a trauma background, largely because of how we get treated by society. If you've had issues with school, issues with education, issues with your family, issues with friends, all of these can sort of lead to higher levels of anxiety. I think our sensory differences for a lot of us can contribute to higher anxiety at times too, because even something as small as sort of going to the local shop, there's going to be a lot of sensory bombardment. There's going to be a lot of sensory experiences there that maybe some non-autistic people wouldn't necessarily experience. So You might really love the smell of the fresh bread aisle, but going past the fish aisle might be really, really difficult for you. There's the bright lights, all these sorts of things. So our sensory differences can make it a little bit harder whenever we're navigating the world. That can make us feel a little bit more anxious about trying to navigate with it. Being misunderstood is a huge thing. And I think we're hoping to come and do a webinar on autistic communication next year. I think maybe sort of March, April time, possibly. And a lot of the communication that we have as autistic people does get wildly misunderstood by others. As autistics, we tend to really say what we mean. We tend to be quite clear and direct an awful lot of the time, whereas a lot of non-autistic people will take what we said and then try and infer things and try and sort of work out what we really mean whenever we say it, when actually just what we said is what they should be taking. But if we're consistently misunderstood by other people, then it can make it a little bit more anxiety provoking to try and even have that social conversations. Masking is a huge topic. And, earlier on this year, we ran a masking and burnout webinar 3 times to meet with the demands, because we had so many people really desperate to be understanding that. So again, it's something that I'm sure that we'll come back to looking at in a few months' time. But masking, for those who aren't overly familiar with it, is doing everything that you can to camouflage that innate autisticness that is you. So it's any kind of outward sign that you are different to the others. And whenever we do that, that can be quite devastating and traumatic to our sense of self, to our sense of our own individuality. So that can have a really high impact on how we view ourselves, how we present, how comfortable we are whenever we're out and talking with other people and interacting with the world. And we've got a lot more about masking on our website for anyone who's looking for more help and support around about there. Stigma and discrimination, for those of us who are openly autistic and talk about our openly autistic experiences, you can face a tremendous amount of stigma and discrimination in doing so. Sometimes being openly autistic can be absolutely wonderful. And it can be really affirming whenever you're meeting other people who have those same experiences. But if you're talking about being autistic, maybe in the workplace or in education, sometimes with your family, when people have misinformation about autism, whenever they still think of autism in terms of small, very young white boys rocking backwards and forwards, and that is very far from your lived experience, at your age, that can be really, really difficult. So that stigma and discrimination, being yourself, can add to that anxiety that we can feel. Communication differences, I think we've kind of covered a little bit, but I think see with being misunderstood, sometimes that can even come with why we're doing something, and our motivations for doing things as well. They can often be wildly misunderstood as well. Difficulty with transitions is absolutely huge. Every night whenever I drive home, I'll quite often take a minute or two just sitting in the car, because leaving the car and going into the house, even though I'm desperate to go into the house and see my family, is a transition. And when you think about the amount of transitions that we go through every day, getting up out of your bed is a transition. Leaving your bedroom is a transition. Going through to the kitchen to make yourself a cup of tea is a transition. So there's loads and loads and loads of transitions that we face all the time. And if we've got big transitions coming up, or we're starting something new, then that can lead to higher anxiety as well. As an autistic person, I just have lots of questions all the time. And if I don't have the answer to those questions, that just makes life so much harder. And sometimes it can be really hard. I think this is part of the being misunderstood as well. Sometimes whenever we ask all of these questions, people think maybe that we're challenging them, or that we're maybe not believing them. And literally, it's just, I need the information. Can you give it to me, please? Isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yep.
You anything to add?
No, I think that, you've covered it a lot there. So that there are just a lot of reasons that we're just that bit more likely, aren't we?
Yeah. And it can be tricky, it can be, but that doesn't mean to say that, we have to be anxious all of the time.
No,
And whenever we get the proper supports, we can deal with these sort of things. And I think, those big conversations with friends and family and employers about our communication differences, tackling that stigma and discrimination, all of these things can really, really help. But we're trying to give an example of what it's like for most autistic people, especially those whenever they're coming to use our services. These are the kind of things that they report. They're all things that can be tackled. So please don't be thinking that, this is just how life is going to be. They can all be tackled. But this is why many of us might start out by having that higher baseline of anxiety on an everyday basis.
Okay. So we also wanted to say a little bit about alexithymia here, because it kind of does play a big part when it comes to emotional regulation as well. So a lot of you probably have not heard of this term alexithymia, and it's it took me ages to actually remember how to pronounce it and how to spell it. So I'm very happy to explain, because I'm so super pleased that I've finally mastered that. But yeah, alexithymia is essentially kind of when you have difficulty recognizing and naming your own emotions, and then the emotions of other people as well sometimes. So it can make things really difficult if you just genuinely don't know what it is that you're actually feeling. And quite often autistic people are alexithymic as well. We do find that Venn diagram where you've got, autistic people and alexithymic people has a really big kind of crossover. And that's probably partly because alexithymia is thought to be a bit of a trauma response a lot of the time. So it does make sense that a lot of autistic people who, as Marion has already explained about, those higher levels of past trauma for us, it makes sense that you'd get that kind of crossover. So quite a lot of us might recognize that we feel bad, but we might not be able to kind of pick apart much, past that. So it'll be like, well, I feel bad, but I don't know whether that bad is frustrated, or whether it's, annoyed or irritated, whether it's kind of upset, or whether it's, anxious, or, it's just bad. I just feel bad. And we might be able to pick out what the emotion was that we were feeling, but not until after the fact. So that might be the next day, it might be the next week, it might even be the next month or year before we've actually properly processed everything and figured out and been able to name that emotion that we were experiencing at the time. So obviously that can make meeting sensory needs more difficult, because, if you're not recognizing that you're becoming irritable, for instance, and that, you get irritable when you're hungry, then you're maybe not going to recognize that you're hungry as well. It can mean that, if you're not recognizing what those emotions are that you're feeling, how do you know how you're responding to your physical needs? So it can be really, really difficult actually for a lot of us. And it can be harder to identify and communicate your support needs as well, because often when people want to ask you about what your support needs are, they kind of ask you how you feel about certain things. Well, that's really hard if you don't know. And quite often we kind of we end up being accused of being difficult, or kind of standoffish, because we can kind of just get stuck in this sort of loop of, well, I don't know. And other people might not really understand that, but how can you not know what you're feeling? Of course you know. Well, actually, a lot of the time we just don't genuinely know. So it's really hard to then advocate for ourselves when we're not actually sure how we feel in certain situations. So we're not really sure what it is that we need to make them more accessible for us. And it can mean that we end up with social difficulties as well, because again, if we're not really sure how we're feeling, well, how do we kind of communicate that to other people? If we're struggling to pinpoint what emotions they're feeling as well, then that can sometimes mean that we say the wrong thing, that we accidentally offend people without meaning to. And it can genuinely kind of mean that sometimes we come across one way as well when we're actually feeling another way. So it gets very complicated, and it can mean that we struggle socially. But it doesn't mean that we're not feeling those emotions. We're still experiencing, whether it's frustration, whether it's joy, whether it's irritability, whether it's confusion, whatever the emotion is, we are still experiencing it. It's just that we can't recognize and name that. And so that's really difficult when you are still feeling those emotions. And often we are still also able to empathize with other people and take on their emotions, but we don't even know what it is that they're feeling, and then by extension what we're feeling. So it can be incredibly complicated, but you can see how, if you aren't able to really pinpoint what it is that you're experiencing in terms of emotions, how becoming emotionally dysregulated becomes much more of a kind of danger zone for you, because then you're not recognizing when you are feeling an extreme emotion. And if you're not sure what emotion it is that you are experiencing, then how do you support yourself with that, you know? So it plays a massive part when it comes to emotional regulation and the difficulties that a lot of us might have around that. So that will seem fair, Marion?
Yeah, and I think, was it about 50% of autistic people are
alexithymic.
thought to have had alexithymia to some extent as well. So it really is very common. It's not exclusive to autistic people by
No.
any stretch of the imagination. It just is quite common. But we did find something that we thought can be quite handy for a lot of people, didn't we?
Yeah. So yeah, we've got this emotional literacy wheel, because it can be so hard. Even, you know, I do writing and things, so I do a lot of kind of exploring of emotions of characters, but being a slightly alexithymic myself, it can be so difficult to sort of try and figure out what is that emotion, what are different kind of expressions of that emotion, you know, what's similar emotions. So something like this can be really useful for that, for exploring it, and sort of trying to figure out, okay, so what am I feeling here? You know, is it sort of one of these basic emotions? You know, am I feeling happy? Okay, well, what kind of happy am I feeling? You know, am I feeling like sort of peaceful just now, or am I feeling playful? You know, well, okay, let's take that a bit further. And it can really help you to explore. It can help you just to be aware of what the options are, first of all, because sometimes we're not really very good at even listing options of emotions, because if we can't identify them, then again, how do we even begin that process? So having something like this to refer to can be quite helpful in terms of developing that emotional literacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of work's been done in schools looking at sort of children and how well they know those emotions and stuff, and it can be really difficult for them to be aware that there are so many ones that they can go into. And so often as well, I think as autistic people, our emotions get mislabeled by a lot of others, because our facial expressions maybe don't necessarily match what they would be expecting to see. So, you know, I'm very concentrated face tends to look quite annoyed to a lot of other people. It might even look aggressive to some. So it can be really difficult to believe that you're feeling the emotion that you're feeling when other people are telling you, so many other people are telling you that you look like you're feeling something different, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I think that, you know, alexithymia does often go hand in hand. It's really important to look at interoception at the same kind of time. And interoception is one of my favorite senses to be talking about, because for a long time I had absolutely no idea what interoception was or how it played a part in my daily experience. But when I found out about it, it's like, wow, this was like, you know, the lights being turned on for the first time. So interoception is one of our senses, you know, like the sense of sight, touch, smell, taste. And it's all about our ability to recognize what's happening with ourselves physically, what is actually going on with my body. And for some people who maybe have poor interoception, they might have difficulty recognizing what their physical needs are. So they might find it really difficult to recognize that they're hungry, that they're thirsty, that they are too hot, too cold, that they're feeling unwell. So it's all about, you know, just what is physically going on with the body. But some people who are autistic may be highly tuned into it and be particularly sensitive to their physical needs. So then they might notice that something going wrong well before maybe, you know, a doctor would notice, or before other people might notice. So, you know, if you're particularly tuned into your body, then you might be that person who's taken off your jumper and putting it back on again every couple of minutes, which has definitely been me at times. But I've also at times found it really difficult to be recognizing my physical needs too. So it's not just, you know, you are one thing or another. You know, some people, depending on how they are feeling emotionally, might be more or less tuned into their sense of interoception than they would be at other times. And it can make meeting your sensory needs an awful lot more difficult, because if you are not noticing that need in the first place, then meeting it can be really, really difficult. And if you're noticing it almost constantly, then meeting it can be an awful lot of hard work too. And I think, as a menopausal woman, I'm, taking off jumpers and putting them on every couple of minutes, extra cold, extra warm, never knowing which one it's going to be from one day to the next. And I honestly think that just managing temperature regulation for me at the moment is almost a full-time job by itself. But if you're struggling to recognize what's going on with you physically, or if it's happening all the time, it can be harder to communicate those support needs to others as well, because they might find it difficult to understand what's going on with you too. And if you're struggling to recognize those physical needs, then it can be harder to identify them. And this really can lead to a lot of physical difficulties, because if you're not recognizing when you're in pain, you can then go and aggravate something. For example, I remember being out hill walking once and sort of being vaguely aware that my knee was a little bit sore. And then by the time I got back home again, my knee was massively inflamed and I needed to get some physiotherapy afterwards. Whereas if I'd recognized what was going on earlier, then I maybe could have done something to help, maybe could have shortened the walk, maybe could have used some walking sticks or something, like some walking poles that could have helped me. But not recognizing these things can then lead to physical difficulties, which will then possibly add to anxiety, which will possibly add to that emotional dysregulation as well. So these things can be really, really strongly linked to each other. Anything you'd add to that then, Flip?
No, I just I'm one of those people who I sometimes realize that I'm hungry because I get hangry and I'm like, why am I just so grumpy with the entire world? And then get, oh yeah, I haven't eaten for like 8 hours.
Well, I think this is why what I love about our staff team is that we will check in with each other.
Yes.
Have you eaten today? How long has it been since you went to the toilet? Have you got some water with you? And just having somebody to check in with you on these things can make it so much easier, can't it?
It's so
and then
helpful.
can help us to regulate.
Yeah. And because we're always all doing it for each other, we get into good habits as a team as well, I think.
We try. Yeah, regulation buddies. It can make a big difference. Yeah.
It really can. And yes, talking of regulation. So yeah, we're sort of wanted to just highlight here how interconnected sensory regulation and emotional regulation are, because they really do kind of go hand in hand, and that part of the brain that sort of deals with sensory regulation is really kind of quite interconnected with the part of the brain that deals with emotional regulation. So for everybody in general, it's something to be aware of, but for autistic people with our, differences in sensory needs, and our sort of higher likelihood of getting emotionally dysregulated, it's particularly important to remember that. So yeah, if you're dysregulated in terms of your sensory needs, if you're in an environment that's distressing for you in terms of the sensory input, that's really not meeting those needs, then chances are you're going to be emotionally dysregulated as well, because one typically leads to the other. But that also means on the flip side, when your sensory needs are met, it's much easier to then regulate your emotions as well. So yeah, and vice versa, when your emotional needs are met, it's easier to sort of manage your sensory needs too. And quite often, I will sort of suggest various activities for people if they are feeling emotionally dysregulated. Certain kind of sensory supports, putting into place a lot of sensory support can really help then at that time to make sure that you're gonna balance yourself out in general. And I think especially a lot of kind of big proprioceptive movements can be quite helpful for some people. So, some good pushing and pulling type motions can really help with regulating those emotions. And it can be particularly useful for kind of small kids as well, to do things like, big bicycle legs with them, get them lying on their back and, right, we're going to do big bicycle legs here, or right, okay, you're going to push against me and see if you can, who gets to, push the other one forward or backwards. Only do that if they're small enough, because once they get to a certain age, they will just send you catapulting across the room. I have been there. So, you know, things like that can be really useful. Actually, it can also kind of help bring you out of that emotional dysregulation as well, you know, because you get to focus on something else for a minute, and then hopefully by the time you're sort of back to thinking about things again, you've managed to sort of help regulate yourself a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, it's so helpful as well, you know, that recognizing that those things are so linked has made a massive difference to the quality of my life, and I mean, an awful lot easier when I remember to be putting these things in action. But yeah, knowing, right, if I've got good sensory input, then that's going to help me to be regulated. It really, really does make such a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
There we go. I think, yeah. So I think the first part, so now that we've explored why sensory regulation can be really, really tricky, you know, we can move on to thinking, what can we do about it? What can we do to help ourselves to be emotionally regulated? So I think knowing your triggers really is one of the first things. So what are the things that make you dysregulated in the first place? And for a lot of us who are autistic, others being dysregulated can be a massive, massive big trigger. So many of us who are autistic are enormously empathetic to what other people are feeling. So if there's somebody around us who is feeling dysregulated, then we can very quickly become dysregulated around them too. And I think sometimes we've talked about domino meltdowns, haven't we? You know, where one person starts having one and then another and then another and then another because there's other ones being around too. So yeah, other people being emotionally dysregulated can have a big impact. And if you've got a house that's filled with autistic people and non-autistic people, then one person being dysregulated can really have a big knock-on effect. Sensory input, too much or lack thereof, can be a big trigger as well. So yeah, being in an environment where there's too many noises, too many smells, too many different textures that you're wearing, or not being able to get the sensory input that you need in order to help you feel regulated can be a big thing. Those differences in interoception, we've covered that, haven't we, already? So we know about that. Demands. As someone who's got a pretty demand avoidant profile, then whenever I feel like there's a demand being placed on me, then I do really struggle, and that can be a massive big trigger for a lot of autistic people who are like that too. Particularly those of us who might be perfectionists to a certain extent, and you know, as a recovering perfectionist, I'm really trying not to. But whenever there's a demand and I struggle whether or not I'm going to be able to do it perfectly, that's a really big issue. Stress can be a big trigger as well, because that can really lead to dysregulation quite quickly, especially if you don't think that you've got as much support for dealing with whatever it is that you're stressed about as you should be having. Praise for a lot of us is really difficult. I mean, we kind of touched upon it earlier, but praise can be seen as a bit of a demand as well, because well done, you did such a good job on this. Does that mean you're expecting me to be really good at all the things now? Am I supposed to be really good at it next time as well? And I think for many of us, it's really difficult to see ourselves as being good internally. And sometimes it can be a little bit easier if, and this is something that another one of our colleagues, Anne and I, were talking about a few days ago. Being told that I did a good job on something is a lot easier than being told that I am good at something. But sometimes it can be really difficult for other people to understand the nuances of that. And not every autistic person is the same, but praise can be really, really difficult for an awful lot of us. Although some people absolutely thrive on it. So mental illness can be an absolute big trigger as well. And we know that a lot of autistic people may end up diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, with depression and various other mental illnesses. And, you know, they can really raise that baseline and really bring up those triggers as well. Unexpected changes can be a huge, huge, huge big trigger. I really love my friends and family, but, you know, if they were to suddenly throw a surprise party for me at some point, they know better than to do that for sure. But that would be a massive, big unexpected change that I would really, really struggle with. You know, sometimes getting a surprise of something that might be really lovely could be really difficult. Again, if somebody was to suddenly say, Marion, here's a puppy for you, there'd be all the emotions going on at the same time. I'd be going, I'd be going a bit mad with that emotional literacy wheel, saying, what am I feeling? Because it would be all of them all at the same time. So even if it's a potentially good change, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, a death in the family, for example. That can be a big trigger. Too much excitement, as we've said, can be really difficult. We've supported quite a lot of families where the child may have gone to a birthday party. Maybe it's their birthday party, maybe it's another child's birthday party, but they end up having a meltdown because there's just so much excitement and too many things sort of going on at the same time. Social situations can be a bit of a trigger for a lot of people, and there's a lot that can be done to really manage those, to make sure that that situation can go really well. And I think that's all about knowing what your boundaries are. Do I want to go to a social event that's got 200 people? Nope, I know I don't. That's quite clear in my brain. Do I want to go with 10 people? Still not really convinced about that one either. But are there ways that I'll make exceptions for that? 200 people, if it's a really good friend's wedding, might be okay. Can I make sure that I'm leaving early? Can I get seated sort of close to the door? So there are things that you can do to be managing some of those to make them a little bit easier. And hormonal changes can be a huge trigger for many people. And we've worked with quite a lot of, autistic people who menstruate, who struggle maybe like 1 week out of the month or 2 weeks out of the month, dealing with those hormonal changes, going through your teenage years, going through puberty, going through pregnancy, going through menopause. These can be massive big triggers for people. And again, some of these are triggers that we can't necessarily do very much about. But if we know, right, I'm going to go through big hormonal changes next week, that's going to be really hard for me. So maybe I won't have so many social situations. Maybe I'll ask my friends not to praise me too much next week if that's been the case. Maybe I'll ask my partner to go and do the supermarket shop because the sensory input there is going to be too tricky for me. So knowing what those triggers are and being able to avoid some of them, at least some of the time, can be really handy, can't be quick.
It can. And I've seen I've sort of been glancing at the chat as we've been going, and I've seen another couple of suggestions earlier on as well. Things like the news sometimes can be really triggering for a lot of autistic people, especially if there are big global events going on and you're kind of doing that doom scrolling thing, that we can't drag ourselves away from. But also like the weather, if there's been bad weather over an extended period, or that kind of change in seasons, things like that can be really hard for us as well. So I thought that they were some really good ones to point out too.
Yeah, and I think, I know quite a few people who've got seasonal affective disorder, and this time of year, I mean, personally, I look at autumn trees and I think it's beautiful, and I think they're really stimmy and they're lovely. But I also know some people who look at autumn trees and just see death and decay. So, a lot of people really kind of struggle with that sort of thing. And living in the north of Scotland, and I know Anne has that even more being up in Shetland, the days are so short. Yeah. They are so short. I'm really pleased that we're less than a month away now from the shortest day, and then they're going to start getting longer again, which is going to be absolutely brilliant. Yeah. That's keeping me going at the moment as well. That's one of those things that's a happy trigger for me at the moment. Shortest days around the corner. Yeah, not long, and then we're going to start getting more daylight. More.
Yes, more daylight. I love the summer for how long our days are, but the winter can be hard for those really short days.
Yes, but as someone who struggles to regulate their temperature, winter is actually quite good for me in some ways just now, but that's a whole other webinar.
Absolutely. So we want to kind of, we are never ones to sort of present you all with a problem and then go, okay, then we're done, goodbye. We always like to have those solutions. So carrying on with that sort of theme, how can we actually start to think about supporting ourselves in terms of our emotional needs? Well, we can develop our emotional literacy because we sometimes aren't great in that area, due to alexithymia, and sometimes that interoception difference as well. We're not always great at that. So using that beautiful vocabulary wheel from earlier with the emotional literacy terms on things like that can be quite useful. And some people like to keep sort of emotions diary as well, you know, so that they've got an idea, they can track, you know, what emotions they've been feeling over time. And so, yeah, taking time to actually identify what those emotions are can be really, really useful. And it might be that initially that's really difficult because, yeah, if you're alexithymic, that's not going to be easy, but you can learn to identify your emotions through other kind of ways as well. So through physical cues can be quite useful. So, you know, do you find that when you're feeling really frustrated, you tend to clench your fists, you know, because, ooh, that's a physical cue that you can look out for then to recognize I'm feeling frustrated. You know, if you're feeling anxious, does your stomach feel like it's kind of tying itself in knots? You know, if you suddenly feel really embarrassed or really annoyed, does your face flush and get really hot? So, you know, it's sort of thinking about those physical cues that you can look out for as well. And it's maybe also even looking in the mirror to literally see how you actually look, right? Well, what is my face doing right now? And can I figure out, you know, what emotion that is connected with as well? So finding those other ways to try and figure out what emotion you're feeling. Sometimes that might be talking to family members as well, because sometimes they'll have noticed those patterns. If it's someone you trust, if it's someone that you really trust to, you know, not be kind of gaslighting you or anything, but to genuinely have been able to recognize some of the emotions that you're feeling when you're maybe not able to, that can be a really useful tool as well. And then sort of staying along those lines as well, co-regulation can be really, really helpful for a lot of us. So co-regulation is when, you know, you're maybe struggling to regulate alone, so you need the input of someone else to sort of help you as well. So quite often, you know, we practice that in our one-to-ones that we do with people. You know, if we can tell that they're emotionally regulated, then we will try to co-regulate with them. It's something a lot of parents do with their children a lot of the time. Sometimes that can mean kind of matching them where they are and then sort of helping to bring them back to a baseline, to, you know, a good kind of regulated state. Sometimes it might be that you don't have another individual that can do that for you, but pets can be really great for co-regulating sometimes. I've got one of my cats is what I call my emotional support pet, because she can tell when I'm emotionally regulated. She's always been really good at being able to tell, and she'll just come and sit on me and just purr. She just puts her weight on me, good weight, and she purrs away, and she's so soft and fluffy, and she's the cat I'm least allergic to as well, so that's also helpful. And yeah, her just sitting there and purring on me, you know, on my lap or on my chest, really does kind of help bring me back to that baseline. If you don't have any pets and you don't have any people around to help, then even things like a soft toy. I've got my emotional support Raven here, and I see that Marion's got her Porg, she's got her Jeff there as well. So you know, something like that even can sometimes be quite useful as well, to try and get that same co-regulation effect, if you don't have those options readily available to you. And also using soothing sensory input, you know, something that you know is going to help. So is getting that weighted blanket out and snuggling under that, is that something that's likely to help you regulate again? You know, do you need to kind of block out the rest of the world with some noise cancelling headphones and just listen to your favorite same song on repeat, you know, really loud or something? So thinking about soothing sensory input, things that you like to feel and see and sort of taste and smell, and, you know, just think about all of your different senses and whether there's good soothing input that you can seek out as well. And that's really helpful. And I think we've got another slide as well to continue this, have we, Marion?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about the number of people that we've supported who've said that they've maybe said to partners, can you just platonically lie on top of me just now, for that kind of sensory input? I think, you know, as someone who has a weighted blanket that I don't use as often as I probably should, every time I do use it, I think, why haven't I used this for such a long time? This is amazing. But again, it's just that remembering that it's there and having it handy and having it helpful out there for you, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah. I mean, if you're dysregulated, then sort of removing those distressing triggers, so not just the sensory triggers, but, you know, the other triggers as well. So if, for example, you know, the news app going off and telling you about these things is distressing, do you still need the news app on your phone? Can you delete it? you can re-download it later on. You don't need to have it on constantly. So just having it on at the times that you feel regulated enough to have it. Or can you turn off the notifications on it? Because again, I know quite a few people who maybe had those notifications on their phone before, but then decided that, this isn't exactly it. Accepting your emotions sounds like a really obvious one, but I think for many of us, it can be really difficult to be accepting of those emotions in the first place, especially if you've had a lot of people denying those emotions throughout your life as well. So if you've been maybe encouraged to stuff those emotions down, to not acknowledge them in the first place and to not deal with them, accepting that you're feeling them can be a really big job for you to be able to do. And then working through with those emotions once you've accepted that you're experiencing them can be enormous as well. I mean, that's not an easy thing for people to be doing necessarily, but accepting that, you know what, I feel really angry right now. And instead of parking that emotion and dealing with it, actually going ahead and embracing what that is and exploring why you're feeling it and working through that feeling is an awful lot better for yourself, not just in the short term, but in the long term too. Self-soothing and self-care. I mean, Felicity, you spoke about supporting some of those sensory needs as well. Self-soothing, actually, I'm just about to start doing some of that just now with a cup of tea that my lovely husband just brought me. Self-soothing can be something that you're doing that maybe isn't always going to be the best thing for you, but it's going to make you feel good even short term, because that can really, really help. But then having to think, right, long term, what is good as well. So, having this cup of tea just now is absolutely fine. I have no problem at all. That's all right. Making sure I don't have too many of them all in one day is a good idea, But another thing that can help me to regulate my emotions is going out into nature. So I can have the cup of tea just now. That'll be really, really soothing. And then tomorrow I can go and I can have a walk through some trees. Sorted. That sort of thing makes a really, really big difference, doesn't it? And a self-soothing box is something that we've kind of spoken about, and sometimes that can be a little bit around self-care as well. So the idea behind that is that you can have a box that is full of things that is going to make you feel good. I mean, seriously, how good does that sound? Just by itself. Downstairs in my living room, we have an enormous box that is full of fidget toys, and a lot of them give really, really good sensory feedback. And so for us, that's a really good place for us to be self-soothing. So feeling a little bit dysregulated, oh yeah, that fidget toy is going to do the job there. Is that a tactile one? Is that one that I can chew? Is that one that's got flashy lights? Is that one really soothing? Is it going to have some really gentle movement that I'm going to enjoy watching? So having various different things that can be really good. And I think sometimes as well, even scraps of fabric can be really handy there. Or like if it's a big enough box, you can put in any specific jumpers that you've got, or other bits of clothing that might be really handy. I have one particular hoodie what is incredibly soft, and it feels like I'm getting a big cozy hug from it whenever I put up the hood. And for me, that hoodie by itself is just the epitome of self-soothing. So something like that, I know that exists there. So if I'm feeling dysregulated, that is something that I can go and do pretty quickly. And, I can remove those distressing triggers, and I can go and do something that's going to make me feel really good right in that moment. And if I can get there quick enough, then I can stave off that meltdown. I can stave off that shutdown. I can maybe stay in that room a little bit longer, or I can get out of that room before I'm too distressed. Yeah. How's that sound, Flip?
Yeah, no, that's all good. And I keep meaning to kind of make my own self-soothing box. I've got a little a drawer full of sensory fidget toys, and I've got like where the weighted blanket lives and things, but I could do with collecting together an actual box. It's one of those ones that I preach it a lot, but I actually need to practice what I preach as well sometimes.
I hear you, because seeing that you're preaching to this choir for sure. We've got some support for others, Flip.
Yeah. So we know that, you know, some of you might be here on behalf of an autistic child or autistic family member or someone you're supporting professionally or something as well. So sort of thinking about when you're providing that emotional kind of regulation support for other people as well. A lot of it's largely the same, to be honest, but we did want to kind of point out some of those differences as well. So again, supporting the development of that emotional literacy is really quite helpful. And that, you know, again, sort of thinking about ways that you can help them identify. So it might be as well that you want to actually take photos, especially if you've got a child who, you know, needs to kind of be able to communicate what emotion that they are feeling. It might be that you want to have sort of flashcards to help them communicate that, but an abstract picture, especially if it's some kind of emoji style, you know, expression, is not always actually that great for us. I don't know what a lot of emojis are supposed to represent or mean, and people put them in messages to me and I'm like, oh, hopefully that doesn't mean anything bad then, because I can't figure out what that face is supposed to be conveying to me, you know.
And yet sometimes we put them in I quite often use an emoji to put in a message to help explain how I'm feeling, and then I worry that I'm not using the emoji correctly as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and a lovely neurodivergent friend sent a message to me this morning, and then included an explanation for the emojis underneath, which I thought that's wonderfully neurodivergent communication, and I love it.
I will admit I have done that before, and I have explained why I have reacted, you know, Facebook reacted in a certain way. Well, that was for this bit of what you said and not for this bit, you know, obviously I wasn't loving this part, you know. So absolutely that kind of over explaining, you know. So to kind of get around that, taking actual photos of the physical person, instead, sort of, you know, putting on the different faces to represent emotions, that can sometimes be a bit more useful, a bit easier for us to actually identify what's going on. That co-regulation again, so, you know, sort of making sure that you're staying calm, and you're kind of regulated, and then whether or not it's that they want a big hug from you, you know, it might be that they do want a big squeezy hug to get some deep pressure. It might be that they just want you to kind of sit with them, you know, just be there in the room with them, but sort of staying quiet. It might be that they want you to be speaking to them, you know, telling them that they're loved, that everything's going to be okay, that you understand, you know. So exactly how it looks will vary from individual to individual, but that co-regulation can be really, really useful. It's a good tool to have. Also making sure that they are safe, that they're physically safe, but also more than that, making sure that they feel safe, because sometimes we are technically physically safe in a space, but that doesn't mean that we feel safe in that space. So, you know, making sure that there's not other people around that are going to be making them feel unsafe, you know, making sure that the environment around them is really going to be supporting, you know, for them, that it's going to be nurturing, and that it's really going to be making them feel as safe as possible. Also using sensory input that you know will work, you know, good soothing input, again, much like we've already discussed for, you know, if you're doing it for yourself. Removing those sensory triggers, anything that's going to be really distressing, you know, whether that's turning the lights off, whether it's you know, sort of switching off a computer because the hum, you know, it's been on standby and the hum of all the electrical items in the room is too much. There could be a whole host of different sensory triggers. So if you know that certain sensory input is going to be distressing, just make sure that that's gone. Validating emotions is so helpful and so important as well, because when we feel like our emotions are being dismissed, that really doesn't help with us regulating at all. That's going to make us more emotionally dysregulated. So yeah, kind of instead of oh no, but you know, it's not really that bad, it's okay, you know, instead saying, oh, I understand why you're feeling like that, you know, I would as well, you know, that was really difficult, wasn't it? And actually validating those emotions as part of that kind of soothing and that regulation is really helpful. And then we've got the self-soothing and self-care again. So again, is there something short-term that's going to kind of help, you know, but also thinking about longer term, what sorts of supports you can put into place to really kind of help with that self-care. And again, the idea of having a self-soothing box, so that there's something ready-made that you can go to when you need to, and you're not having to look around all over the house for the, oh, where was that one thing that was really useful, and oh, where's the blanket, and where's, you know, it's all just there already in one place. So yes. Oh,
We're almost there. We've got just a couple of
almost.
slides left. Yeah. And we've got a couple of slides, you know, so those were really handy for sort of talking about how to deal with you are dysregulated. But whenever it comes to preventing dysregulation for future dysregulation, you know, as a disclaimer, we're never going to prevent it completely, because we're never going to have absolute complete control over the world. That's not going to happen. You know, you could decide to go off and live as a hermit and things would still happen to dysregulate you, because there would still be the weather and all sorts of other things that would be going on. So again, for preventing that dysregulation, you know, working on identifying those emotions again. I mean, I don't think that we can cover that quite enough, because the more we're in tune with our emotions and how we're feeling emotionally, then the easier it is for us to sort of notice that we're getting dysregulated and do things to help us to regulate. Working on increasing that good sense of interoception. And some people really swear by things like, you know, yoga and Pilates for helping them to really notice what's going on in their body. Or you could do what we do as a staff team at AU Scott and have like a check-in buddy who's making sure that you are paying attention to your body a little bit more. And I have to say, since we started doing these little physical check-ins with each other, it really has helped me to stop and do that on days when we're not working together at times as well. And sometimes, you know, if I think, right, I need to message Flick, oh, have I eaten today? You know, those sort of things just do start to come in a little bit more naturally. And I find that really, really helpful. So, you know, you can either ask somebody else who is also the same neurotype as you to do, or you can ask someone who's a different neurotype. It really doesn't matter. But having an interoception check-in buddy really does make a big difference to that sort of thing as well. Discussing altogether what helps you or helps the other people to feel regulated, and what other people can do can really, really help as well. So, for example, if I am feeling dysregulated, then, you know, some of my family will bring me a cup of tea because they know that I find tea particularly soothing. And that being the case, a cup of tea really does help to calm me down. Getting some peace and quiet. So if I'm feeling a little bit dysregulated, then they might say to me, do you want to go upstairs and watch some Star Trek in your bedroom for a little while? Yeah, yes, I do actually. And that is going to help me feel a little bit better. Because that's me using those special interests to help me to regulate again, which can definitely be handy. You know, using STEM toys is another thing that sometimes will help me to regulate, so making sure that I've got them nearby. And plan ahead to anticipate any potentially triggering situations. I'm very happy to go and do the supermarket shopping for my family, but I won't do it on the same day that we've had a family gathering. I love family gatherings, I really do, but having both of them on the same day is a bit too much. And having both of them on the same weekend, when my hormones might not be quite in tune as they might be otherwise, definitely not a good idea either. So it's having a wee thing. What's my stress levels at work going to be like this week? What's my stress levels at, you know, college or university, school? How can I manage that? And I think as well, see, whenever with coming up to should we say the C word already? We did. A lot of families do like to plan in lots of really, really nice things. So in Aberdeen, for example, we've got the lovely Christmas village. But do we want to do school plus Christmas village plus going out for dinner all in the same day? Maybe with some people, maybe they can, maybe that's okay. But maybe some folks, that's maybe a bit much. Maybe school and Christmas village and then going home for tea might be just that little bit easier. Maybe going and doing Christmas village and then going out for dinner when you haven't had school could work a little bit better. So it's just managing how much can I deal with in a day and making sure that I've got those breaks in between so that I've got that chance to re-regulate again if I start to get dysregulated. I think we've got another one, Flick, haven't we?
Yeah,
Dysregulation. Yeah.
just a few more things and then we're
Mhm.
almost done and we can have a little Q&A. So yeah, also work on creating a sensory profile. So we do actually have a sensory profile available on the website. What we would always say is the best way to go about creating a sensory profile is with an occupational therapist, because they're really qualified to kind of go through all of those senses, that they're really gonna know what can help. However, we do also recognize that accessing occupational therapists can be quite difficult for some people, and in some areas it's very, very hard to actually get that referral. So we do have one on the website that's up on our downloadable documents section in our hub, and that can be downloaded. It was created alongside an occupational therapist, and you've got then a little kind of guidance notes as well on how to complete it, and there's an example that was completed again with an occupational therapist, because we know that having a little example can be quite helpful for us in terms of filling things in. So we do have that there available for anybody who might need it, and then there's also actually ensuring that your sensory supports are accessible. And mentioning that, I did make sure for tonight, because when we do webinars, it's end of the day. I've actually worked quite a lot of hours today, so I knew that I might be getting to that point where I might be a bit dysregulated. The light's starting to feel a little bit more intense. I might need to turn off my big overhead light soon for the Q&A. So I knew that I might need some sensory supports available to me. So I have a little selection that I can kind of show you here. So I've got this little fidget here, which is like a kind of bike chain one that I can slip on my thumb, and that's really good for just sort of fidgeting. I've got a smooth stone, which actually isn't a specific sensory toy, but it's just so shiny and it's lovely to feel. I've got a little fidget cube one as well. I've got a little kind of spinner that also you can bend the legs on it. So I've got a few different ones that I've been kind of rotating whilst I've been chatting here. So making sure that they are actually accessible, that there's somewhere that you can grab them when you need them is really useful, because I think some of us are quite guilty of buying lots of great sensory stuff and then it kind of gets shoved away at the back of a drawer somewhere, or you stick it in your bag for work and then forget about it, and you end up not actually having them to hand when you need them. It's also boundaries are so important. So practice saying no, actually literally do practice it in front of a mirror if you need to, without excuses, without caveats, just saying no to things, because you are allowed to. No is a complete sentence, and then stick to that no.
And don't apologize for saying no either.
No.
I think a lot of us be like, I'm really sorry, I can't do that. That just leads into a conversation of, oh, well, when can you? So no, you don't need to apologize for saying no to things. You really don't.
Yeah, and you don't need to create an excuse. If you just can't do it, then you can just say no. That's absolutely fine, and having those good healthy boundaries is really important, I think, for keeping us emotionally regulated. And then I think Marion already mentioned this earlier, accepting that at some point you will be dysregulated, that the people around you will be. We don't have control over all aspects of our own lives and everybody else's at all times. There will be things that come along sometimes and they just make us kind of dysregulated. And thinking about some of those things earlier that we thought could cause it, things like hormonal changes, that's gonna happen. That's something that's going to happen to you that you don't have control over. So there are times when you are just going to feel dysregulated, and that's okay. It is all right. But at least now you've got a load of stuff that you can put into place to help with that, to really help support yourself, to help support those around you, and to help kind of bring you out and really kind of even you out again afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard sort of accepting that, you're going to be that dysregulated again at times. But I think knowing that it's going to happen means that you can give yourself a little bit more of a break about it.
Yeah.
And I think quite a lot of us can feel really bad whenever we've been dysregulated. But as you said, it's part of life. It's part of being a human being. And autistic people might be a little bit more prone to having periods of dysregulation. That's actually okay. We just need to be a little bit more thoughtful about, you know, dealing with it, don't we?
Yeah.
As always, we like to leave people with some key takeaways, so that they can use that for going forward. Everyone can experience dysregulation. So, you know, you might be a bit more dysregulated more frequently than some of the other people in your house, at your work, college, university, school, but that doesn't mean to say that the other people don't get dysregulated too. So everyone does experience it. And having that higher baseline of anxiety can make it easier to be dysregulated. Your glass might already be half full whenever you get up in the morning, meaning it might be already just about full whenever you get up in the morning, and then it could just be harder for you to stay regulated than everybody else. And again, recognizing that means that right from the beginning of the day, you can be doing things to try and manage that. Recognizing those triggers, and massive kudos to everybody who was recognizing some of their triggers in the chat, as well as the ones that we shared as well, because everybody is unique and everybody is going to have different triggers. And as we've said, what can be absolute bliss and joy for some people can be a massive negative trigger for other people too. So, you know, we really are all unique individuals. So we do need to be taking that very much personalized approach to this. Supporting your sensory needs can really support your emotional needs and vice versa. And the more we're in tune with our sensory needs, the more we're in tune with our emotions, the easier it is for us to start regulating. And so many of us who are autistic have been told time and time again that our sensory processing is wrong, our emotional, our displays of our emotion are wrong. But do know that your sensory processing is exactly how your brain is supposed to be processing that sensory information. Really is. That's how your brain was built. Might be different from others, but it's perfectly natural the way that your brain is processing them. And your emotional responses to things are perfectly natural. You know, there's a reason why you're responding emotionally in the way that you're responding. So your emotional and your sensory displays are absolutely valid for what they are. They really are. And I know that there might be a lot of people here who haven't necessarily heard that very often. And it really does help to plan ahead to prevent or minimize that dysregulation as well. And it takes time. You know, this isn't something that you're just going to get absolutely right as of tomorrow. Flick and I have been trying to practice doing these things for quite a long time. And, you know, sometimes we'll make mistakes, and sometimes we'll plan to do something and then we'll completely forget about doing one thing that can help us. We recently did a wee road trip, and I totally forgot to bring sunglasses with me, even though I usually take sunglasses with me to help me to regulate sensory, even whenever it's quite a dull day. So, you know, we might plan ahead, but we might still fail. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn from that experience and then plan ahead again for the next time. So, you know, just trying every time something happens, just taking a wee bit of stock. What went well? What can I do next time? How can I plan ahead to make sure that it goes better the next time again? Okay, well, I think we'll stop our recording there. So thank you to everyone who's joined us for the recording, and I'll stop that for just now.